Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Michael Branson Smith, and this is Jim Groom. I'm our Slate man, starting the show for Breaking Away, the 1979. What a better film to follow an Italian classic with someone faking being Italian.
It's like me. I am this guy.
Yeah.
I'm not as good at Italian as him.
No, not quite. And I did realize that Dennis Christopher, who plays Dave Stohler, the son of an Indiana family, a son of a stonecutter family, and he actually spent a year in Italy. He actually was in a Fellini film.
No way.
Yeah, he was a hippie. It was one of his first roles. He was a hippie in the film Roma from 1978 or something, or 1976 or something like that.
Okay, can I ask you something quickly while we're talking about him?
Yeah.
What happened to him after this film?
Oh, so yeah, it's kind of cool. I was listening to an interview with him. He was back on stage with Daniel Stern and Paul Dooley, and of all people, the guy who played Rod. You know, the douchebag.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah, totally. Yeah.
His name's Hart Bushner, and there's a funny story from that. Anyway, he was amazing. Like, he had a killer start. He did Chariots of Fire after this, and he had some crazy thriller film. I can't remember the name of it, that was set in New York. And then he kind of fell into kind of like bit parts in television here and there. But freaking Quentin Tarantino slaps his script for Django Unchained on his front step with a hand note from him. And it talks about how basically don't worry, because it was going to be the Leonardo DiCaprio's brother. And he's like, I'm way too old to be Leonardo DiCaprio's brother. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'm rewriting the role just for you. And Tarantino had watched every single one of his movies, and he had his eye on forever, like classic Tarantino wacky shit, right? You know, where he's like, I even watched your worst movies and I loved it. You, not the movies. Like, the movies sucked, but you're awesome. So
he was in Django Unchained?
Yeah, he was the lawyer for Leonardo's character.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah.
Think
about it. It's like, how about a whole new life when Tarantino plucks you out of nowhere, right?
Well, there was a great thing with Jackie Brown and, the actor who played...
Robert Forster.
Yeah, who talks about that.
Yeah.
And talks about, like, I have 2 wives, 4 kids. Like, I get no calls. Like, I'm going back and I'm finding a job, right? And then Tarantino changes my life.
Yeah. So, talk about life-changing. So this film's directed by Peter Yates, who directed Bullitt. Steve McQueen, he's an English director. He's been around forever, done a lot of great stuff.
The Deep.
And Go ahead.
He did The Deep.
Yeah, I've never watched this.
He also did Krull.
Oh, that I want to watch. It's a movie like as a kid. It was one of those movies that you saw the ad for it and you were too young to ever get to go to it. And then I forgot about it. And I was like, oh my God, I've got to watch this movie.
McDonald's glasses. There was a video game man after Krull.
Yeah.
And it was like a terrible Star Wars ripoff.
Oh, I got to watch it.
But the special effects were amazing.
Yeah.
So it is such a weird... Me and Antonello watching this, and then I look up this guy. I'm like, what else did he do? I'm like, Bullitt, wow. And then I'm like, Krull?
Yeah. So kind of a workman-like kind of a pass as a director. Like, he's obviously incredibly talented. And it's back when movies were made in places where the movie was set, right? One of the things about this film is the entire film is shot in and set in Bloomington, Indiana, around the college town of the University of Indiana. And it's Steve Tesich who's really kind of the star. He ends up winning the Academy Award for Original Screenplay in 1970. And this is the year of Kramer versus Kramer, which won for Best Adapted Screenplay. Thank God that's an adaptation. Otherwise, there's no way you would have won. I didn't know that was an adaptation. And he was a playwright. He was he literally went to Indiana University, and was a teammate of this guy named Dave Blaze in the 1962 Phi Kappa Psi. There we go. Phi Kappa Psi team that won the Little 500. So the Little 500 is this goofy bike race that Indiana puts on because it's like an analog to the Indianapolis 500. So we're like, oh, let's do this
Gotcha.
200-lap, 50-mile bike race. So it's kind of a ridiculous because you're doing a bike race on a on a runner's track, a 400-meter runner's track, which is awful. Like I can't even imagine that's easy,
that. Yeah.
you know? And so, but it becomes a thing on this campus, and that's kind of cool. Like it becomes a thing. And so the script that Steve Tessich writes is based on his lifelong friend, Dave Blaze, who was someone who was kind of like a nobody. He grew up in Indianapolis, and he goes to college, and his housemate is saying, like, you got to try out for our bike teams, because that's the thing. It's like all the houses have bike teams. And he was like, tells a story about hiding in a bathroom to avoid going on a ride with these guys, because he thinks he's just going to, like, because it's a big macho guy, and he's like, I'm going to suck. I'm going to be like a loser. And he finally says, I'm not going to get out of this. He made him go. And he takes off on all of them because he's tiny, and he's like, and he talks about which cycling is. And I loved cycling as a kid. Like there were two sporting events I loved. I didn't like traditional sports when I was a kid. I loved the Tour de France, and I loved the Ironman, like the Scott Tinley, Dave Scott thing.
I went to one of those in Hawaii.
Really?
Yeah, my brother ran it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I just loved it. I loved, because I was one of those morons. I delivered newspapers from age 8 to 18. I was a person who was bred to suffer, right?
Yeah,
like
you would be sucked into that Ironman mentality.
Right. Like, and I understand this mentality. He thought he was a kid that was meant to suffer, right? And so that's how he just was. And so he was this little machine on a bike. And so he gets recruited by actually one of because the fraternities are super competitive, and so he gets recruited to actually race for this fraternity. But they're such shits. There are people that keep changing the rules, and he doesn't get to ride it for the first 2 years. And then he finally gets to ride it in his last semester of his senior year, and he rides 139 of the 200 laps.
Wow. So really right out of the movie.
Right. And so his name, Dave, is named after Dave Blaze, and his last name is Kohler, which is named after the person who was the actual director of their team, the manager of the team. So it is based on that group. And, so he wrote a script about Dave Blaze, and he tried to sell it, and it was actually through Peter Yates' idea to combine it with another script he had written about a bunch of boys that were living in a university town and struggling with the being the kind of working class conflict with the wealthy class of the university, right? And so they combined it, and that becomes Bambino, which becomes Breaking Away.
That's
and
awesome.
Boy, what a cast they got together.
Oh my God. This is an interesting cast, right? 79. Just put it out there. Who do we got? Start with who?
Well, we got Dennis Christopher, who's Dave Stohler, but he's brand new. But so is Dennis Quaid, who becomes a superstar over the next 4 decades. Exactly. He gets to play Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp. He's in the Big Easy, Any Given Sunday, Traffic, and my personal favorite, the trashy The Day After Tomorrow. I like my bad sci-fi films.
It's a good one.
But my favorite, well, I have two favorites. I have Paul Dooley, who's the dad, but Daniel Stern, he talks about this is his first film ever, all right? And he was a struggling actor, and he's with his girlfriend, who's now wife of like 50 years. And he gets plucked out of nowhere, and it's like he's like, this changed my life. We were like moving from apartment to apartment in the middle of the night, selling our furniture for the next apartment because we couldn't afford the rent of the previous one. He's like ducking out. And he plays Ciro, who's like kind of the sad jokester. He's like probably the saddest character of them. But then we've got Jackie Earle Haley. Oh my God.
My God, Rorschach.
No, but better than that. He's Kelly.
Absolutely. He's in the Bad News Bears.
He's already a seasoned actor. He's been Kelly in the Bad News Bears. He's the badass that like seduces Tatum O'Neal over some air hockey.
And he's still like that in this movie. He's still got those moves.
He's got the moves, yeah, with Nancy. And then
the
Paul
sweat stains.
Yeah. Oh, right.
But I just want to say one quick interjection about Daniel Stern. I always thought that it was Chud that started his career. Little did I know that it was Breaking Away. It's very hard for me not to say Breaking Bad. I keep on saying, I just watched Breaking Bad the other day. I'm going to do a podcast about it. They're like, the whole series? I'm like, oh, no, Breaking Away.
yeah. No, and I was trying to look up the Mike's car, like one of the muscle cars. I think it's a Chevelle, but I'm not sure. And so I was trying to look it up. And it's like, Mike's car from Breaking Bad. I was like, no, Breaking Away.
Exactly. Like, and there's all these podcasts about the car and analysis. And Mike's on a podcast talking about the car.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And so then we have Paul Dooley, who, to us is probably better known as Molly Ringwald's dad in 16 Candles, right?
It seems like they, John Hughes must have seen him in this and been like, I want you to be the dad.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, again, like one of these things about this show we're doing is we were just talking prior to the show, there's so much, like there's so much focus and energy on studying a particular film, even though we have this context of family, you learn things you didn't know. Like, number one, this is based on a true story, which is odd as all heck. But Paul Dooley was the showrunner and the creator of the electric company.
I had no idea.
And he's married to, for 40 years, Winnie Holtzman, who was the showrunner of My So-Called Life. Which is like... So lots of crazy stuff. But he talked about, in this interview about Breaking Away, he literally calls this the best film he was ever in. He thought the acting opportunity, he just credits the writing of Steve Tesich and the shepherding done by Peter Yates. And this notion of it takes an English director and a Yugoslav. So, Steve Tesich immigrated from then Yugoslavia, now Serbia, when he was 14 years old. And here it is, a couple foreigners telling the story, a really intimate story of an American family.
Yeah,
right?
How about that?
Yeah, and unsurprising, it takes a foreigner to tell us what we actually are, right? And then finally, Barbara Barry, who plays Evelyn Stohler, the mother, who's just a classic, all-star TV actor through the 70s. She was Barney Miller's wife forever on the TV show that ran for, I think, almost a decade. And so we have, it's still important to keep talking about Steve Tesich in my mind because he, in his Oscar-winning speech, it was kind of interesting. So he wins this, it's his first script that's turned into a film. It wins an Oscar, and he's up there talking about how, as an immigrant, he was talking about watching Stagecoach, right, when he was a kid. And how much, it gave this image of this America, of this wide open range where good fought against evil and good would win out. And he still believed that. And these are immigrants that believed in the American dream, literally still, right? Like that's what it was. And in such a context of now of like, what's the American dream anymore? And this is a space in which people believed in it, and good would still win, right? This notion of good winning, and you just feel so far away from now. And it's hard because he dies very young at age 52 of a heart attack, just like his father, who died very young right after coming to the United States. And, it was something, this was a portrait of something that he could put out there because he talked about how he was never able to really get to know his father because he was 19 or 20 when he died and he was in college. And, there's the disconnect of being a new family in America, I imagine, and it's very tough. So there's two families really in this picture, right? We've got the Stohler family, but we also have the story which we start with, which is the family of these boys, right? These boys who there's a lot of exposition in this movie.
Unlike Fellini, that hack.
Yeah. We learn very quickly they're just graduated high school, and they're introduced to us, and they're a family of sorts because this is the story of the breaking away. There's the breaking away from your family as, Dave must, as a young adult, transitioning into an adulthood, but it's the boys who talk about, I thought, one of my favorite quotes from Sarah is, I thought the idea was we were going to waste our lives together, right? Like this was never going to end. And, it's the quarry, this famous quarry called the Rooftop Quarry, which was one of the holes created by his father, a stone cutter. That's one of these famous limestone corners that looks like this perfectly cut, 10 football field size swimming pool, right?
Yeah, it's amazing looking. It's beautiful, and that with that one wall coming down, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, and apparently it's been like partly filled in. I discovered this podcast of this couple that they run around. I don't know. I only watched this one, but they have like 20 some odd thousand viewers, and they go all over the place looking at film locations and matching shots and layering them on top of the reality of now. So that's goofy. Anyway, and Cyril. Oh, you'd love this too. Cyril talks about how they're no longer to have to write themes.
Oh yeah, he does. Right there, you go.
He's an Italian at heart, right? It's not an essay; it's a theme.
It's a theme. Tema.
And so the quarry is this seminal location that represents their past and their togetherness as a family of four boys at age 19, and they've you get a sense that Mike, who's played by Dennis Quaid, who's the former quarterback, he's kind of the controller of the discourse, at least previous, because he was the quarterback, right? And he's losing his grip, but you can tell like he's the one who knows everything about everybody. He's like, because it opens with Cyril walking in and talking about how this is where my life changed, or my interest in life ended, right? Is that what it is?
Exactly. He's very emo. He's looking at a particular part of a rock and saying, this is where I found her.
Yeah, and he saw his girlfriend with some other man, but it was actually Mike who knew about it, right? And Mike told him to show up. And Mike seems to know about Moocher and Nancy, and Moocher first kind of brushes it off as fake, and Cyril's just like, I don't know what to do with my life. And he's always making jokes, and he tells stories like there. And, but you get a sense of like in this space, we're trying to make sense of the boys and how they relate to one another. And they're still trying to hang on to their friendship, right?
Yeah, but there's also a sense like it does it really well. Like obviously Cyril jokes about, he's kind of a joker, and he's kind of like you. He talks about comics in his head like a frying pan, and wish it'd just come back like that. But then you also get a sense that Mooch, his family's on hard times, and his dad had to go to Chicago, and they're hoping to sell the house so they can raise some money. And so he's kind of in this house, and you see this in a later scene, and, it's for sale. And like you get a sense that this town gown breakup or division, between the locals or the Cutters and the college kids is another classic John Hughes class division, right? These poor kids versus these rich kids. And the quarry becomes a space where once the rich kids come, Mike is pissed. He's like, this is our space. You got to go. Like, this is actually the invasion of that kind of colonization of their town by these rich kids. And I love it. I'm like, I always thought it was like, I always looking for Ground Zero themes. This is another Ground Zero 80s high school class movie. Right.
And this is the precursor because this is 79 too, right? So this isn't it's not grounded in their studentness, their high schoolness. It's grounded in their transition afterwards.
Yeah.
And they're completely lost, these characters. Well, I mean, interestingly enough, we actually learn Mooch is probably the one who's not lost. Mooch has this clearest identity of the group, I think.
Yeah. And he has a sense of what his future is.
Yeah, he even though he's talking about, I'm not seeing that girl Nancy anymore. Clearly, in the aforementioned house, there's this amazing scene where Nancy just shows up and Mooch is using an end table. Like, there's nothing in the house. It's like super dark. There's like the curtains are just blowing just to kind of create this like morose atmosphere. But Mooch is in the middle of the living room, which has a couch and an end table, which is in the center of the room, and he's bench pressing off an end table in front of Nancy
with those really recognizable plastic like weights that they used to have in the 70s
that were filled with
80s.
Like concrete and sand.
Exactly. And he was just sweating, and he had a cut off sweatshirt. Oh, it's just a beautiful moment from the 70s.
And you would at first think he seems like kind of an ass because he seems like he's ignoring Nancy, but at the same time, this is one of these things that happens a lot in this film where people appear to be talking past one another, but they're actually intimately communicating, right? Which is something I felt very much about the Stohler household, which is introduced with a dad. And what is he doing? Do you remember our introduction to Dave's dad, played by Paul Dooley? It's Ray Stohler.
I think he's complaining about his son being a fake Italian and listening to this music. But the thing I most kind of empathized with him on is, his wife is trying to feed him this food. and he's one of the foods, not in the immediate, but later on, is fried zucchini. And see, Antonella's like, see, fried zucchini, it's good for you. You should be doing this. Like, come on, Jimmy. Like, you're not
nothing
exactly
with an ED in it. Get it, linguine. But he's literally sitting at the table. The meal at this where we're introduced, he's been forced to eat. Remember a half a grapefruit? Remember that was a thing in the 80s, right?
Oh,
like somehow,
totally
who was the PR
and cottage
person?
cheese.
Yep.
Oh, shit.
And he's got a fly swatter in hand, and he's swatting flies on the table while he's
Papa,
eating.
do you know how to say fly in Italian, Papa?
Mosca.
I love his Italian.
Yeah, you know what fly is in American? I think he says American, not English. He said pest.
Exactly. I mean, the Italian piece was kind of funny because Antonella was like, what a bizarre movie. But she was kind of taken by, obviously, him always speaking Italian and love of Italian culture. But then as we get to it later on, the Italian cyclists.
Yeah,
that's
bastards.
awesome.
But it's he basically, there's multiple scenes where, and this is this interesting, like I was saying, like this oblique conversation about their son between the mother and the father, right? They're talking about Dave, and they're clearly worried about him because they talk about how they've decided to give him a year off, right? And figure out like whether he wants to work or go to college, and he's really into cycling right now, and the Italian cyclists in particular, and he trains all the time, and he hears they might be coming to Indianapolis for this race. And so he's kind of obsessed with that right now. And he even drives his friends a little crazy speaking Italian to them, mostly to Mike. Like Mooch is like, he loves him. He doesn't care. But there's all these things where basically you'll have, he's fly swatting, literally. He's like fly swatting the table, and he blames Dave's cologne, like his Italian cologne is the cause. It's like he's attracting flies with this Italian culture, basically, right?
Yeah. I love it. I mean, that whole idea, and just also like as Dave constantly on his cyclist, he's got the cyclist cap.
Yeah.
He's got the gloves. Like, I think one of the
fingerless
things,
gloves. Yeah.
I think one of the things about this film is it popularized cycling in a way that in America that it hadn't been. And that's why Antonella was like, what's this big deal with the Italians and the Italian group? I'm like, because I don't think cycling in the European sensibility was nearly as popular in the U.S. I might be wrong with that, but this film kind of elevates it to a whole nother level.
There's definitely, I came across a couple articles where people talk about like this led to a cycling boom in the United States, right? I mean, it's a film it's an everyman's film ultimately, right? And they take this highbrow sport or European sport, not even highbrow, just this European sport, road racing, right? And turn it into something that's accessible to the son of a working class, stonecutter. And so it makes a lot of sense how that would lead to, in like the culture of the boys being all working class kids and making it accessible, yet some have aspirations for college, but others don't. Anybody can do this.
But it also becomes a way in for him to actually be on the same level as the university students.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there's an interesting, by being fake European, like you have this sensibility of culture that comes with it. And so there's that whole, subplot between him and the girlfriend throughout that is interesting and very interesting as a kind of like, because I have to say this, I have to give a shout out to my friend and colleague for a long time, Andy Rush, who's a huge fan of Breaking Away, and I think was also like a competitive cyclist in his day. And so like this is for him like a film of great note about like when cycling came to the US and kind of arrived as a thing. And like you're saying, not necessarily as, this hoity-toity European going through the kind of, Alps in Italy, but, going around a track in Bloomington, Indiana 500 times, right?
Oh, my God, 200 times. But yeah, it's still ridiculous. Like, talk about an American brute force of like, we're going to make this sport ours. It's like F1 racing, these elegant, beautiful machines, like weaving through these, curved tracks and stuff like that. Or what are the races, the car races where they go across, like cross country and stuff like that? No, we're going to Americanize this and we're going to go in a fucking circle. That's what
I like
we do.
the demolition derby. That's what I used to go to as a kid.
Yeah.
That's another thing. See, that's where I think,
now we're going off topic. But yeah, that would be fun. And so, the wife always deals, so he's constantly haranguing his son. It's like, why should he go to college? I never went to college. When I was 19, I was already working 10 hours a day. And he's never tired, never miserable, or what else? This is one of my favorite lines. He comes in and Dave's like, "Buongiorno, mama and papa," and it's like, "I'm not papa, I'm your goddamn father."
How about the dad being 50 though? Was that a wake up call for you? That was a wake up call for me.
Oh, I know, right? He's about to have another kid too.
I know exactly. But then, what was the name of the cat? That's what I was about to say. No. It's like, so Dave calls him Fellini, right? That's awesome.
Dave has named the cat Fellini, and it's like, but his dad's like, that's my cat, and he's like, your name's Jake. He points to the cat. The cat's like, what did I do?
I'm brilliant, and I mean, there's a lot of details. Like you said, though, I think the relationship between the father and the mother is pretty good. The father is bizarre. In that he's overly like he's I don't know, how would you say it? He's like overly articulating everything and overly like combative, and he's just a kind of a weird figure. I mean, he comes along towards the end, but
he's not. But the funny thing is, it's not like he's a total asshole at it. It's a weird like balance that Paul Dooley's playing with this disapproving father, but he's not violent. He's not disrespectful to his wife at all. He complains about the food, but he eats it, and that's what I was saying. Like, there's this, you can tell like that they're in a good marriage because they're still talking to one another. Even though they're talking past one another, you can tell they're still communicating ultimately, right?
Totally.
And so that's how I kind of read it. Is even it's weird. It's a wonderfully cast. It's a wonderfully played father figure that normally most actors would make him more of a jerk. Like, he'd want to be more violent with his son and or just simply more abusive. He's the only time he's kind of abusive is when he's talking with his wife in the bedroom, and Dave is overhearing him, calling him a bit lazy. That's kind of the worst he gets. But other than that, it's fine.
She's
and his mother
here reading that into the Valley of the Dolls, right?
Yeah. She's like, I'm in La La Land, literally. It's like, this sounds good. And speaking of like Evelyn, the mother, she's this character she's classic. Like, she's role playing, like reading Valley of the Dolls is this notion of the 70s wife who's like kind of stuck in a role. And there's this lovely scene, which I learned was completely ad-lib. The scene did not exist, where she talks about getting a passport. They're quite inexpensive.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
And that scene wasn't in the original script, and she must have crafted it with Dave's character. And the only time she's ever used it is in the A&P, right? When there's a new person that needs to see an ID to show so they can do their, money on the tab that they must have at the grocery store, the A&P, right? How as funny is that? And it's her way of saying, you've got to do things. Get out there. Now is the time. Even though your dad's saying all this, it's basically, again, like an oblique conversation. It's like, even though your dad's saying all this crap, he wants you to do things too. And we learn that over time too. But my favorite one from his mother, though, is when he finds out that Cinzano is coming for the race, and he's like so excited, and he crosses himself, right? And his mother happens to be gardening when he sees this mail, and she's like, Oh, Dave, try not to become a Catholic on us. That's like the one bridge too far.
Exactly. You can't go there.
Because she's not chiding him at all for any of his Italian. She actually loves it. She loves the music. She starts to wash she puts the opera and gets some. Right. She gets some, some good, whoopee time with her husband with the opera music during the serenade.
I tell you though, but when the Italians come to town, they are a bit of a disappointment, right? Like I love when he trains for it. One of his training is with the trucker who's like 3 and the 4. I mean, what a great scene.
That scene is the scene that's the one that makes people fall in love with cycling.
It's a great
right?
movie. Yeah.
And so like he's just learned about like the Italians are coming, so he's like instantly inspired. I'm gonna go do my time trial to Bloomington, right? And he literally gets on the highway, and this is. My best friend as a kid, Chris Hall, and I, we loved our bikes, and we biked everywhere. And we used to bike to this military store called Quonset Salvage, and we would go on the highway, and we were like psychos. Yeah, and cycling everywhere was everything to us. We would cycle miles, like, not just around town, but as far flung as our parents would let us or not know we could get away with and still get home by night. And, so you get a sense like this is his space, and you're right. He starts out on the highway, and sure enough, they have the 18-wheeler of the Shinjano team truck, right? So good. And the driver is just so into like, oh, look at this kid. All right, let's see if he can keep up. And there's the shooting is so wonderful because it's like the point of view of the driver through the mirror, which is really shaky, right? And he can see the back of his truck, and then he would pop out for just a moment. He's like, "Oh, he's still with me," and then he would drift back in because he's drafting on them, right?
Absolutely.
And this is the idea: is like in that empty space, he gets up to like 60 miles per hour.
Is that possible?
I actually think it is, because as an avid fan of the Tour de France, watch it. Tadej Pogacar, who's like the newest, greatest athlete, dominating the Tour de France over the past 4 years. When they do their descents, they're getting up to like 40, 45 miles per hour on a descent. And conceivably, you could get that speed in a draft space, maybe. I don't know. Like, it's not downhill, so maybe it's bullshit.
Right? That's why I was like, 60? And I guess that's the license of Hollywood, too. But I was like, really?
I easily he's hitting 40 or 50 for sure, right? Because I would imagine your draft space. I wish I had my friend Dave Lefevre, who was he actually was because I was a swimmer, and so I was the one who wanted to suffer his whole life. One flip, two flip. That was all I did for 10 years until I found rowing, which was even more brutal. But anyway, this friend Dave Lefevre, who I met, he did cycling and for a period of time, and he was the one who told me, and this is why the Italian thing, it's a dirty sport. I never knew that.
It turns out though, so the Cinzano team, what happens, to fill you in, is obviously, our main character's thrilled. He goes up to them. He's even racing beyond them. They're like, ha, ha, ha. And then they shank his tire. They basically flip him over.
They shove the pump, like one of those bike pumps that's basically like a steel rod. Well, it's an aluminum rod. And they shove it right into his spokes, which is like stops you instantly.
So I'm saying to my Italian wife, I'm like, hey, Anto, look, those Italians don't come off too well. And she's like, well, they're not Italian. They're Sicilian. Gives you an idea of this culture.
This is the Fellini thing. Yeah, you said it. There's no Italy. There's just communities that make up Italy.
The Sicilians did that.
Oh my gosh, I love that we have. And so, yeah, I mean, we're jumping ahead to like this is the big transition, but to kind of back up, there is this the family of the boys is stretched. Due to the tensions that are building with the locals versus the college students at Indiana University, and there's this one guy who's played by Hart Bosher, who plays Rod, right? Who's like kind of the local asshole, And it's funny. So he was in this interview. He's like, you're like, how did you make it on stage with Paul Dooley and Daniel Stern and Dennis Christopher? And it's like, well, he showed up because we weren't getting Dennis Quaid and Jackie Earl Haley. So, and it was kind of sad because the person who was moderating their conversation, Rod went first to introduce himself, and it was like, well, I got this job. It was his first gig right out of college. It's like I graduated college and I immediately got a part in a movie. And he was like, he was telling the story of Rob, like Silver Spoon kind of character that he is. And the moderator's like, yeah, totally. You're the kind of guy that they saw and they're like, fuck that dude. and then Hart Buscher's like, yeah, I still get that.
That's awesome.
But Paul Dooley saved him. He was like talking. He's like he played the role. He was very generous in this interview scene. So it was really funny that he got thrown under the bus right away. But back to like the tensions, and so this character Rod, who's like on the swim team, he's the one that they confront in the quarry, and Mike and Rod have a swim race. And I knew that was going to go back because I was a swimmer. And like you can tell swimmers versus people that were actually swimmers, like trained as swimmers versus people that are super strong. And, even when we were in high school, you could not do gym and instead be a leader corps. And so I was always leader corps for the swim class because we had and so there'd be the jockiest guys, right, from football and stuff like that. And you put them in a pool and they could be terrified. You know what I mean? And like, and not that, but definitely aren't fast, right? Because it's a different skill to be fast in water. And so it's so sad.
Did you abuse them like, Rod abused Dennis Quaid or Mike?
No, I felt bad, when he smacked his head again. Whenever they'd smack their head,
he was doing a back,
totally taunting him, right?
Backstroke.
This is a scene where after these tensions have gotten to a point where there's a confrontation at the bowling alley inside the university, where Mike's brother has to show up, who's actually awesome. It's actually John Astin, who's Taggart from the Beverly Hills Cop movies.
Exactly. And he's the father, Cliff, in Some Kind of Wonderful, which is a John Hughes film.
Yeah.
There's a connection. I love that father in Some Kind of Wonderful. He's Eric Stoltz's dad.
I forgot about that. Yeah, he's so good. Eric Stoltz is such a pussy, though.
I like Eric Stoltz.
Oh, come on. Really?
I do. I can't help it.
He tried to be Back to the Future guy, and he was just too emo. He's just too emo, Jim.
Do you ever see Killing Zoe, man?
No.
Okay. Well, then.
All right, so we're
go see Killing Zoe and then come back to me and talk to me about Eric Stoltz.
Okay. Anyway, so there's this big fight, and his brother. You get a sense that Mike's remaining parental figure is his older brother, right? And so you get a teeny little glimpse into Mike's world, and Mike's world is like kind of closing in on him as he's no longer going to have that shot. He talks earlier about there's this chance. I think they're going to call me, and I'm still going to stay in shape so I could play football at University of Indiana, but it's never going to happen. And
that's a great speech, by the way. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'll be 20. I'll be 30. I'll be 40. That was a great moment for Dennis Quaid.
Yeah, and so Dennis Quaid is frustrated. He challenges Rod to a swim race in the quarry, and this is like the last scene in the quarry, and they do this swim race, and Rod, of course, kills him. And he's literally taunting him. He's doing backstroke at a certain point, which makes sense. Like there's no way he's going to keep up with him. But Dennis Quaid is like so flustered, he ends up whacking his head against the one of the walls of the limestone wall that's left behind from the harvesting of limestone and in the quarry, and he starts to drown, and his friends have to save him. And Rod actually seems sympathetic.
Yeah,
right?
He does. He seems like, I went over the. And there's a couple of moments with Rod like that, but yeah, he does. He's not he's not like a caricature asshole.
Right, like a John Hughes caricature of an asshole, right?
Yeah.
And that I think goes back to Steve Tessich, right? This is a person who's lived, both sides. Like, he's been around people with extreme wealth, but they're not all assholes. Like, he was in a fraternity, but he came from Yugoslavia and, son of a working class family. Yeah. And so he gets that it's a little more complicated than simply like them and us, even though he's often Rod is portrayed as a dick, calling them cutters and no problem using that term whatsoever. And so, I think like
even Nancy, his girlfriend or his wannabe girlfriend when he pretends he's Italian.
Oh, Catherine.
Catherine. Sorry.
Nancy has mooches,
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Caterina.
But even Caterina, she actually, she seems at first like I could never, but then she becomes this real character where she's like, I'm leaving school, I'm gonna go to Italy, and like there's that moment, and like they never like get together, and it just seems real.
Yeah, they have like a couple dates like where they just have dinner together, or and so we're kind of stuck in the movie in a weird way. Kind of feels stuck for a moment here too, where they're just. There's this tension in the inner family. There's this tension in Dave's family. And it's really the Italians doing the shanking of Dave that changes. That's the arc of the film, where Dave finally breaks down, and he starts to own his life. And he comes to his mother and father, right? And, he's so used to being barbed, and he breaks down, and he's no longer, role-playing with Italian, right? Nope. He's no longer trying to spell out, his love for this thing. And he just weeps in his father's arms. And his father's just like, well, I wanted you to be miserable, but not this miserable, right?
Honey, can you take care of this? Can I hand this off to you?
Yeah. But it's and then Dave goes on to confess to Catherine, and, it's what's interesting is Dennis Christopher talks about how this scene with Robin Douglas was also ad-libbed, including the slap, which was like hardcore.
Yeah. Like
where she goes from like being first confused to then disappointed and then angry, right?
Yeah.
And, and Dennis Christopher talked about how this was what was so weird. I didn't know this. In the original creating of this character, the director and the costume designers had him dressing like he was out of the cast of Saturday Night Live Fever. He was going to have slicked back hair and have the big open shirts and the boots and the leather, and the suede. And he did a scene, the scene in the bowling alley with Robin Douglas, right, Caterina. And he said it felt awful. And he was also talking about, and he went home and he talked about like he called his agent and was like crying. It's like, I feel like a fraud. This feels so wrong. And the next day he got Robin, because they were saying like, we need him to have a transformation in the scene where he finally tells Catherine. And it was because of that scene that he thinks they let him be his normal self. Right, which was so important. And it's also awesome. He had a really, really good point too. He's like, and Dave Stohler's friends never would have let him dress like that, like that. They would have given him so much shit. They would have like, there's no way.
And how are you going to afford those Italian duds? Like they spend money on their clothes, not like those cut-off sweatshirts that Mooch is wearing. I mean, let's be clear.
And so, at the same time, after the failure of the Cinzano 500 race, and getting tossed into the dirt ceremoniously by the Italian riders,
the
Sicilians, sorry, Dave dismantles like his Italian cycling stride in his bedroom,
exactly,
like ripping down all his poster.
The map.
He probably started calling the cat Jake again, which would be really sad, but we don't know for sure.
But he's not totally cured of his Europhileness.
Yeah, that comes to fruition. And it's in this moment, his dad takes him on a walk through campus. But before we get to that conversation, it's kind of cool because there's a moment that's just like a throwaway scene where the dad, Ray, just goes back to his old workplace, right? He hits one of the stone shops that's in operations. And it's this incredible space of craftsmanship and massive machinery and like these devices that are cutting through tons and tons of stones simultaneously to make these perfectly flat and shaped blocks of limestone.
Yeah.
And he gets to, and you can see these are all real people like that. These are all the extras.
Most of them had no teeth. Like, they were old dudes.
Yeah.
And I thought when I saw this scene, I was like, wow, what an interesting, strange scene. And obviously all of these, like, they're no actors. Like, this is, they just walked into this stone cutting place. But then he starts cutting a stone. I'm like, something tragic is going to happen to his dad.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not ready for this turn in this movie. But no, he goes over to a folding chair as it's cutting, and he sets it, and he just hangs out. It was wild.
And he also, they're like, mind if I put in a few wedges? And they're like, it's some sort of obviously real process of making sure that the stones that have been cut into like basically slices like cheese almost, and instead of putting like saran wrap around each slice, they pop these little wedges to keep them apart. And he's just participating in his old work, and he needed this connection to who he was, which I think is really important because then it makes this conversation that he has with his son so much more meaningful. And it's in this moment where he and his son are walking the campus, and he's telling, like, I made this building, literally. Like, in my age, when I was your age and younger, me and all of your friends' dads, we were building these buildings. And sadly, when they were done, we felt like we couldn't be in them anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And that's that class conflict you're talking about, right? And even though they literally built the place, they felt that they were out of place when they were done.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting.
And there's
that's a great scene.
Yeah, and there's this and Dave initially takes this as of like, yeah, Dad, fuck those guys. I'm not going to be one of those assholes, right? And it's like, and he tries to say, I'm a cutter, and his dad's like, you're not a cutter, I'm a cutter, right? And he's saying, you have to find your own way. This is your chance, and that's ultimately
you have to. What is it?
Break away.
Break away. Oh my God. OMG. I now understand the movie. 20 years later, I finally understand breaking away.
Yeah. And then and in that context, you realize that all his barbs, even though some of them were getting a little malicious, but in most of them when they were just around his wife, were just him saying like, you've got to get grounded. Like, he knows this Italian thing is going to be a fad. Like, he knows his son, which is so great. And even though, there's a brief, because we kind of skipped over, he works for his dad at the car lot for a period of time.
The car lot's the best.
Yeah. And some of the best scenes are in the car lot where he's working for his dad and he's doing a hard day's work. And his dad's finally like, you finally are tired. You know what it's like to work. And then his son's like, sorry, Dad, I got to train because the Italians are coming. And there's these scenes where he's like working, and then like training. And there's this wonderful shot of him being on rollers, which is actually really hard to do. This is a way of stationary cycling on an actual bicycle where it involves 3 rollers. There's a single front roller and there's a back pair of rollers that support the rear wheel. And you have to literally balance on this thing. So unlike, modern stationary bikes where you're like locked in and, and even the fancy ones, you have to be balancing on an actual bicycle. And there's this scene where he's like totally having at it in the rain. And so despite all this,
but
he has
cars that I like in the car lot.
Oh yeah, they're nice cars though. They're junkers.
Gosh, those 70s cars, man.
Refund. They do make his dad into the trope of the shady used car salesman, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it is pretty funny. And that car they're returning is beautiful.
Yeah. They would have had it fixed. They wouldn't have returned it. There's no way. And so this is the setting for the finale, which is the actual, the little 500, and there's this final scene in the Stohler house where Moocher comes to dinner, right?
Oh yeah, that's great actually.
And Moocher, and it's in this. I mean, it's previous too, because Moocher and Dave are the only two of the friends that really communicate with one another, right? There's a moment when Cyril like is jogging with Dave as he's on his bike, and Cyril is talking about his relationship with his dad and how his dad basically sets him up for disappointment intentionally, right? It's like he never thought I was going to go to college. So he was just expecting me to fail. And so I failed. He even bought me a guitar expecting me to not learn how to play. Like that's his kind of relationship with his dad. And you're just like, man, Cyril's life is rough. He's the one who seems the most lost. And, but Moocher and Dave, like they literally talk to, it's like Dave reveals like how he's pretending to be an Italian student that's at University of Indiana with Katharina, and Mooch tells Dave like how he's going to get married to Nancy, and we see Mooch and Nancy go into City Hall and how they they pay for the light. They go Dutch to split the $5 cost of getting a marriage license.
That's great, exactly.
Fucking love him so much. You're not in here. I'm not in jail with you. You're in here with me. That's the punching of the club.
You're locked in here with me. That's awesome.
He didn't do that with Nancy.
Yeah,
he was such a good Rorschach. So you can
also
tell
love
like
that he gets pissed every time someone calls him short.
Yeah, and that's the idea. That's when the Rorschach comes out, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, that's part of like his character is like, I know who I am. Don't fuck with me. I know I'm not big, but like, come on, there's no reason to be an asshole. And
that's true.
And it's with Dave, like he feels is most comfortable. He tells him about Nancy, and Dave tells Mooch about his, sorry, vice versa, but whatever. Like they're two that and it makes sense that he's be the one that's invited for dinner the day before the race.
Yeah.
Right. And this is part of the breaking away. You get like, oh, Dave and Mooch, these are the two that are going to probably be friends for life. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And what does he say at the dinner table where he almost goes a bridge too far with the dinner?
It's great because like there's two things happening at the dinner party where first there's the announcement of that we know that they're racing, and they give them the T-shirts that say Cutter, so they'll have jerseys for the race. But also Ray announces that they're having a baby, and what does he say? Mooch says something, and it's like, oh no. First Dave's like, we're pregnant. And he's like, no, it's like, we're having a baby. He's like, no, I'm having a baby. You're going to have a brother.
Yeah, that's right.
And Mooch, and now I remember Mooch is like, I didn't know people your age still.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't say it. Don't finish that, boy.
And that was the almost, but Mooch, like, you get a sense like he's welcome there any day, and probably has had a million dinners there since they're probably like, oh, your family's gone and you can be here however many as want.
So, okay, we've done a good job of looking at all the characters, but like one of the things about this film, and you may disagree with me, is it's got a great kind of opening introduction, great ending scene on par with like Karate Kid, where you have the kind of, you really want them to win, and you have all the excitement, and it builds it beautifully, and he gets hurt and whatever. Yeah. But it's a long, strange middle ground between those spaces, right? Like it's a film that in its own way meanders, right? It meanders from thing to thing, like you're the kids in the town, like living.
Yeah. What's funny is like exactly that had this thought, like, I couldn't believe how short scenes would be, right? Like, even though there's this thread of narrative, it was almost like Fellini. Like, it's like they're just bouncing from, like, it was incredibly short. It's like, we're at the quarry, then we're back at the house, and then we're on campus, and then we're, somewhere else. Like, we're in Mike's car driving around town.
Right?
We're eating a pizza. Yeah, like it's wild how short the scenes actually are.
Yeah.
And
it's very peripatetic. Like, it's just moving along as if you're a kid in that town. That's somewhat aimless,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was remarkable. And I just really, really would love to see, is that really in the script? Because I would be like, there would be scenes that are like a half a page almost, right? It's like there's one of the scenes in the quarry is no more than like, I think 45 seconds where they're just hanging out in the sun, talking, and that's it. And then they just jump to another scene. It's like, oh, well, I guess that's all we're doing in the quarry now. And it's pretty amazing. And you're right. And like the ending is your classic Rocky style ending, right? Obviously influenced by Rocky. And, the dad is Adrian. At first he can't go. He's like, I'm too proud. I'm not going to this. And so he doesn't go. But then he like hears they're winning and he's like pantomiming like he's racing too in the car in the used car lot. And so he of course takes off to go. And so he's part of it at the end too. Yeah, you're right. That is the thing that really stuck to me the most is this holding together of this story with all these brief moments. And it seems so much simpler than I remember it ultimately.
I really liked it. I mean, Antonella was like, she kind of couldn't make heads or tails of it. But for me, what I really liked about it is, again, it's like the prototype of so many of the films that would greatly influence me in the 80s. But like the thing about this movie that was interesting for me is I know Breaking Away, it was a huge part of the culture. Like we said, it kind of gave birth to a kind of cycling craze. But I don't think I ever watched it through, right? Like I knew of it. I had seen it with my family or they were watching it. My brother was a huge cyclist. He had like a Motorbacon and this was his favorite movie and just Andy Rush. But I was a little bit younger. And so I'd be like 8 when this came out. So I was probably like, fuck biking. I want to skateboard. Like I don't want to sit on a bike and get my ass all kind of hurt. I want to be on a skateboard skating a half pipe. So like I really like this, but my kind of struggling with this film would come, I would see it. I knew of it. I knew it was, that famous thing when he's in just riding with his hands out or when he wins. Like these are iconic for a 70s kid. But it wasn't a film that I was like, oh, I know it inside out. I love it. You know what I mean?
I guess that's not surprising because I don't think this film ever was supposed to be something big, right? Like,
but it was actually, wasn't it?
No, it was huge. It was huge, but it wasn't supposed to be. Like, it was like a first-time screenwriter, a workman-like kind of director,
Who would next do Crawl?
Yeah. And
which was up my alley.
But it's not unlike films of that time where you had this kind of magical set of talent that was given this opportunity to become movie stars, right? Because that doesn't happen now, it seems, in the same way, with the fractured cultures that we have of screens and podcasters, idiots like us, trying to be celebrities, because you always are. That's all I've ever known about you, Jim Groom, is you're just obsessed with celebrity and being that person. I know, that's what I'm saying. So
I've always been a celebrity, Mr.
and to have like workman-like movies, right? Where it's like, it's just a kid who's obsessed with Italian, and that's the thing. It's like, and I forgot to say this, like, Steve Tessich, it makes sense to maybe come back to him as we come towards the end here. Steve Tessich talks about the way he met Dave Blaze is he's on campus on his bike because he was recruited as a wrestler and he didn't like it anymore. And so he was starting to get into cycling and he's riding around. And that's how they targeted Steve Tessich to be on the team. It's like he had like a 10 speed and the kids from Chicago, right? They figured he must be really into it. And he hears from a distance Dave Blaze singing an aria, right? Whether it's The Barber of Seville, or, and doing Figaro, 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 Figaro. And he's like, who is this guy? And he comes up to him and he's like, ciao, buongiorno. And so this is real. This is someone who's like, oh, he's an immigrant. Oh man, let's connect. Like, I know what that's like. I'm from, I was an immigrant and there's a lot, it's hard. And then he finds out he was like born in Indianapolis, right?
Love it. So interesting though, Krull is not Peter Yates' next film. His next film is Eyewitness, which Steve Tessich wrote.
Oh, right. And yeah, so they collaborated a bit. That's the one that's the thriller. That's supposed to be quite good, actually.
Is it? I've never seen it. That one.
I had never seen it either.
James Wood, Christopher Plummer, Sigourney Weaver, and William Hurt. How about that?
Yeah. And so you have like some real talents, and Steve Tessich is born out of this. And sadly, he, probably due to it, he probably had a history of family heart disease, sadly, and was gone. We never got a ton out of him. Oh,
he didn't eat enough fried zucchini.
No, he actually smoked a lot, and there was this great interview with him. It was like a terrible interview because he did American Flyers with not Randy Quaid's in this, Kevin Costner, right? It's another cycling movie he did in Colorado many years later. Huh. And there's this schlocky 80s, interview with him and puff piece about him, but it shows him at work writing, and he's at a Remington typewriter from the 1940s, slapping at keys with two fingers, like he's like a parody of a journalist, and like the American journalist at the baseball field from The Natural, and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, right? So he probably was not the picture of health himself.
Well,
so I mean,
a hell of a screenplay,
and an odd family picture, but I thank you for sticking with us.
I love it.
No more refunds. No refunds here. No refunds here.
I'm sorry to say we don't give refunds, but that's all right because you're not listening.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.